Chapter 46, A Not-So-Joyous After-Party, 2. Clink. 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 May I have everyone's attention, please? Tapping on the wine glass in his hands, Elijah gathered everyone's attention. Standing elegantly in the middle of the hall, Elijah made sure that everyone was looking at him before continuing. First of all, I would like to thank all of you that decided to attend the gathering. Although our elective could be considered on the smaller side compared to other electives, we here are like a family. Making eye contact with everyone in the room, Elijah's mood turned a little bit serious as he spoke. I have recently been made aware of the conflicts happening between the juniors and us seniors, and it honestly pains me to see this. I may not be able to change this, but I sincerely hope that in our elective this prejudice and conflict does not appear. Pausing slightly, and looking at everyone in the room, Elijah raised his glass and said, "This is more than just an elective. This is a family." At first, everyone was quiet. Turning to look at each other, a myriad of expressions could be seen from certain individuals' faces. They wanted to rebuke, but they dared not to. With Elijah's current influence, his words were law. Refusing him was like signing a death warrant. Clap. Breaking the awkward and tense silence was the sound of a clap. 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 Soon someone else started clapping, and like a chain reaction, everyone followed along and started clapping. I understand, I will follow the president's order. We love you, President. I love you, President. Cheers resounded across the hall as both the male and female students cheered for Elijah. Smiling, Elijah took a big gulp of the wine and once again lifted the cup in the air. It is with great honor and pride that I welcome you to our elective, Food Exploration. Thank you. Food Exploration. Best elective. Though everyone cheered, two individuals didn't. One retained an indifferent face throughout the whole ordeal while the other cringed repeatedly. Of course, this didn't escape Elijah's eyes, as his eyes narrowed for a split second before returning back to normal as if nothing happened. Unbothered by the fact that Elijah probably noticed my behavior, I nonchalantly sat on a sofa and enjoyed my wine. The fact that he managed to say those words without cringing was worthy of my admiration. For all I knew, Elijah cared nothing for the conflicts within the academy. In fact, he was probably rejoicing at the fact that there were conflicts within the academy. Most notably at the fact that some of the attention was diverted away from him, allowing him to act as he pleased. Looking at the glass of wine in my hand, I frowned. Though I usually disliked alcohol, due to previous trauma, it wasn't a problem anymore. Excluding the fact that the wine wasn't that strong, with my new physique only alcohol higher than 70% could affect me. Anything lower than that didn't bother me. Sort of ruined the pleasure of alcohol, but oh well, it's not like I needed alcohol in my life again. After nearly finishing half of the wine that I had brought with me, which I so conveniently hid inside of my bracelet, I felt my bladder bloating. Walking up to a waiter, I asked, "Excuse me, where's the bathroom?" Pointing towards the entrance of the room, the waiter said, "Turn right over there, and after you walk a couple of meters you should see a bathroom sign." Thank you. Thanking the waiter and following his instruction, I headed to the bathroom. A man's gotta do what a man gotta do. Sitting on the sofa, Amanda was lost in her own thoughts. Occasionally she would glance to her right where a male student sat. He looked completely out of place with his clothes that did not suit the atmosphere. He had short black hair and blue ocean-like eyes. His features that were devoid of any pimples or freckles looked clean and pleasant. Though he could have been considered handsome, he was only average if compared to the likes of Jean and Kevin. Looking at him, Amanda couldn't help but look at him in confusion. He was currently sitting on a sofa sipping on some wine, looking extremely bored. No one approached him, nor did he approach anyone, and he seemed to enjoy the solitude as he would occasionally mumble to himself. Was what he said true? The reason why Amanda was paying so much attention to him was because that very same student had approached her earlier. It was when she was on the balcony looking at the moon, lost in her own thoughts. It was odd. She had a vague recollection of him, as he was one of the more famous students in her class. Not in a good way though. The weirdo was what they called him. She wasn't sure about the details, but he was regarded by most of the students as a weirdo that they should avoid at all costs. Thinking about her interactions with him, Amanda couldn't agree more. He was a weirdo. Usually, the male students would come towards her and try all ways to get her attention. Yet, he only told her two things before leaving. What was even more confusing were the things that he said to her. You should be careful tonight. And, something might happen tonight, and you might be the target. No, you're most likely the target. If this was a new trick to try to get her attention, he had succeeded. She didn't really put his warning to heart, but she definitely started paying more attention to her surroundings. Having been in these sorts of situations since young, her temperament became cautious. If anything remotely suspicious happened, she would immediately raise her guard to the maximum. Scanning the hall, everything seemed normal, and apart from a few people already getting drunk, there was nothing odd about the drunk? Weren't wines the only thing that were served here? How could people get drunk off of wine? Instantly Amanda knew that something was wrong. Hiding her hand behind her back, she prepared to summon her bow in case something dangerous happened. Thud. 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 One after another, students started falling on the ground. Amanda instinctively tried to summon her bow, but a wave of vertigo caused her to lose her bearing. Stumbling around, she tried her best to support herself against a pillar. Looking around, every student fell on the ground unconscious. Damn it! Gnashing her teeth, Amanda tried her best to combat the drug effects. Although the drug was strong, she still did not lose consciousness. It partly had to do with the fact that she was one of the strongest people in the room and her strong mentality. But she didn't know how long she could remain conscious for. Time was ticking, and she could only try her best to not fall for whatever plot someone was brewing. Looking around, she tried to look for the boy that had warned her beforehand, but it was to no avail as he was missing. Is he the mastermind behind this? Thought Amanda as she looked for any traces of him. It wasn't wrong of her to suspect him, as he just suddenly disappeared as soon as everyone started falling on the ground. To call this not suspicious would be a lie. Maybe he was the type of person that loved to tease his prey? But she quickly denied the possibility. Although he was weird, she could tell he wasn't the culprit. Although Amanda didn't like to talk much and always seemed to be absorbed in her books, she was always observing. It was something she developed over the years to get a better read on who had malicious intentions against her. Their posture, their expressions, their temperament, she could pretty much determine if someone had any ill will or was wearing a mask to hide their true selves by observing those things. Although he was weird, she could tell at first glance he meant no harm. Cough, cough. Amanda. Coughing and stumbling on the ground, Elijah walked towards Amanda. Looking at Elijah, who seemed to be in distress, Amanda took a few steps back. Huff, huff, huff. Dropping on one knee, Elijah panted heavily. What's happening? Amanda, who although was also suffering, tried her best to restrain herself from helping Elijah. Her instincts told her not to, yet she couldn't help but take a step towards his direction. He was the only key she had to find her mother. She needed closure. Although she was struggling, Amanda was slowly getting used to the effects of the drug. Soon her mind regained some clarity. Arriving a few meters before Elijah, Amanda extended her hand in his direction. Then Reaching with his right hand, Elijah tried to grab Amanda's hand, but before he could fully touch her, she smacked his hand away. Smack! Yo you! Shocked Elijah looked at Amanda, who was glaring at him. Drop the act. What are you talking about? You think you can fool me when the entire time you had a smirk on your face? Taken aback, Elijah touched his face. Coo. Trembling, Elijah's smile deepened as he started laughing. How careless of me, I just couldn't contain my excitement. Standing up, Elijah exaggeratively facepalmed. I'm sorry, I just couldn't hold myself after imagining myself sharing some alone time with you, one of the 3 great beauties of the first years. Voom. Summoning her bow, Amanda instantly drew it. Oh my, aren't we a little too hasty? Raising his hands in surrender, Elijah smirked as he walked in Amanda's direction. Whoosh! 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 As soon as Elijah took a step in her direction, without batting an eye, Amanda released 3 arrows in successions. Suddenly 3 white streaks of light appeared before Elijah as the arrows whistled through the air. Thump! 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 Oh wow, that's some great archery. Looking behind him, Elijah whistled in admiration as he looked at the 3 arrows that pierced the wall deeply. Too bad you missed. Looking at Amanda, who was on the floor panting heavily, Elijah had a delighted smile on his face. A couple of minutes wasn't enough to combat the drug that he had carefully prepared beforehand. Walking slowly, Elijah savored Amanda's struggling expression. Yes, this is what I wanted. Finally, the oh-so-indifferent Amanda has finally shown me a different expression. What have you done to me? Gritting her teeth, Amanda glared at Elijah, who was only a few steps away from her. Oh dear, don't show me such face. Kneeling on one leg and holding Amanda by her chin, Elijah's expression twisted savagely. Now, we wouldn't want our dear Amanda showing such a face now, would we? Grabbing onto her face, Elijah looked at her features in admiration. If not the strict orders I received from Mother Matriarch, I would have already devoured you. Mother Matriarch? Oops. It seems like I spoke too much. Lightly knocking on his head, Elijah had a silly expression on his face. Let's just say that you're going to be thanking me soon. Pooh. Spitting on Elijah's face, Amanda defiantly looked at him. Fuck off. You. Trembling, Elijah touched his cheek where Amanda spat. Looking at his finger, which was covered in saliva, Elijah's face twisted menacingly as his hand grabbed her neck. How dare you spit on my face? His strong voice reverberated across the hall as he tightened the grip around Amanda's neck. Unlike you, I wasn't born as beautiful as the rest. I was insulted, jeered at, and bullied for my appearance. This world's hierarchy is dictated by 2 things, beauty and talent. Unlike you who had both, I had none. I was bullied and harassed throughout my whole childhood. Even my parents forsake me for my younger siblings who had better appearances than me. Gripping on Amanda's neck tighter, Elijah pulled her face closer to his. Just when I was about to end my life, Mother Matriarch came and saved me. She gave me talent, power, and my current appearance. Glaring with all his might, Elijah's voice kept rising. If not for her, I would be nothing. KHH. Lessening the grip on Amanda's neck, Elijah looked at her and said. Thus, no matter how much you struggle, I will stop at nothing to complete her task. Sigh. Startling both Amanda and Elijah, a loud sigh resounded across the hall. Soon a pale youth with deep blue eyes walked into the hall. His eyes slightly paused on Elijah before looking at Amanda, who was struggling with all her might. With an annoyed look, he scratched his head and said, I warned you, didn't I? Chapter 47, a not-so-joyous after-party, 3. I warned you, didn't I? Honestly, though I expected something to happen, I didn't expect it to happen right after I returned from my toilet trip. It felt as if I missed out on all of the fun. It's you? Releasing Amanda, Elijah stood up and looked at me, who had just come back from the bathroom. Coo, huff, huff. Looking at Amanda, who was gripping her neck heavily, gulping for air, I pretty much got the gist of what was happening. The event had already started. Rank 1750 Rendover. Yes? Turning my attention back to Elijah, who had just called me, I instantly noticed his relaxed attitude. The way he was looking at me irked me, but I didn't say anything. Judging from the pressure he was releasing, he was at least rank, if not rank. But fortunately for me, thanks to all the training I did, the pressure wasn't weighing down on me much. The fact that he was primarily focused on Amanda also helped me. Judging from how relaxed he seemed, it looked like he didn't see me as a threat. Perfect. Smirking to myself, I started to devise a plan. Well, since he was looking down on me, I may as well capitalize on his carelessness. You see, one of the greatest things about keeping a low profile was that no one knew what you were truly capable of. This especially worked in my favor, as the Keiki style was primarily a one-hit one-kill sword art. All I needed was one clean hit and he was done for. The fact that I kept a low profile and chose not to expose my strength helped me buy an opening. In fact, even though I said all of this, I wasn't really confident even if I caught him by surprise. Although there was a chance I could kill him if I was really lucky, those chances were slim. It just wasn't easy to bridge the gap between F and D ranks. Though I practiced a peerless 5-star manual technique, I would at most be able to graze him if I confronted him directly. He was just that much better than me. Each rank was fundamentally different from the other. Each rank increase was like an increase in strength by a factor greater than 2. Bridging one rank was already hard for me, 2? Almost impossible. If not for his arrogance, those chances would have never been higher than 0. Knowing this, I had prepared beforehand. Having learned my lesson since the dungeon incident, I devised a little safe plan for me in case the situation turned serious. Before coming to the party, I messaged Thomas and asked him for a favor. Since I more or less knew something was going to happen at the party, I predicted that Elijah was going to install some sort of dimensional space which prevented any outside interference. A dimensional space was a pocket dimension separate from the outside world. Everything that happened inside of the dimension was separate from the real world, preventing anyone from noticing that something was wrong. It created an illusion to people, making it seem that everything was normal, when in fact something else was going on inside. No sound or transmissions could be leaked, preventing people from calling for backup. It was the perfect device to hide a crime. Knowing this, when I messaged Thomas, I specifically told him that if by chance in the next 4 hours my phone suddenly lost signal, he was to send an encrypted message to Alexander Stern, Amanda's father, as well as the authorities. In the message, I directly wrote that a villain was attacking this specific location and many students were in danger. I also emphasized that Amanda was one of the said students. Though the plan was not foolproof, because I had asked Thomas, who was a high-ranking member of the black market, to send the message. Chances were that Alexander Stern and the authorities would receive it. Now all I had to do was stall for time. Looking around and seeing that everyone was on the floor passed out, I knew that I didn't have much time. Though this may have been a sleeping drug, it could have also been an extremely strong poison. Though I didn't know what was in their system, I knew it wasn't good for them. Seeing that the situation was unfavorable, I knew I had to do something. Looking at my skill bar, I instantly used my new and only skill. Monarch's Indifference. Soon, everything around me started to change. The hall, the people, the furniture, everything in my eyes slowly changed. Everything no longer looked like what it was before. Slowly, everything around me started resembling chess pieces. The hall turned into a three-dimensional space with pawns all over the floor. My heartbeat, which was beating unevenly, calmed down. Following my heartbeat, my breathing became even and I felt all my emotions leaving my body. I no longer cared for Amanda. I no longer cared for everyone in the hall. I no longer cared about Elijah. I only had one goal. Move the chess pieces accordingly. What's happening? Wobbling around the hall, Ren's legs staggered. Leaning against the wall, Ren heavily panted for air. And here I was wondering why you weren't affected by the drug. Smirking, Elijah amusingly looked at Ren, who was staggering all over the place like a drunk person. It seems like you're somewhat immune to the drug. Pity that in the end, because you are so weak, the drug still affected you. Looking at Elijah with wide eyes, Ren dumbly said. Drug? Sorry, but I don't have much time to talk with someone as insignificant as you. Walking towards Ren's direction, Elijah's eyes were full of malice. You see, I have bone to pick with you. KHH. Grabbing Ren by the hair, Elijah coldly looked at him. Multiple times in my class you repeatedly yawned and acted bored. Was it fun? Slap. Slapping Ren in the face until a red mark appeared on his face, Elijah raised his hand again. Slap. Someone who is ranked 1750 should sit quietly and listen to the lecture obediently. Slap. Yet, you actually dared to provoke me. Slap. Even now, just as I was about to have my fun with Amanda, you came in and ruined the mood. Slap. Blame your lack of tact for the fact that you will die after being tortured. Slapping Ren's face continuously, his pale face slowly turned purple as his lips started to become swollen. Staring at the scene in the distance, Amanda barely managed to sit up straight. Was he all talk? Though she knew he was ranked 1750, ever since he had warned her, Amanda thought that maybe he was hiding his strength. Moreover, the way he showed up looking all fine told her that he was hiding his strength, but it seems like it was all her misconception. Just as she was about to gather all her remaining energy to shoot Elijah, she felt two cold, emotionless eyes staring at her. Looking up, she could see Ren's eyes emotionlessly looking at her. Though he was being slapped continuously by Elijah, his eyes never wavered. They were the eyes of a predator that was looking for the right time to strike. Stopping whatever she was doing, Amanda looked back at him. How could he still be so calm? Though he was being tortured by Elijah, and his expression twisted in pain, his eyes, which were devoid of any emotion, were staring at her almost as if telling her, not yet. Staring into his eyes, Amanda clenched her teeth and quietly gathered all the mana in the surroundings. Though she didn't know what he was planning, she had this inexplicable feeling that only if she listened to him would she be able to get out of this predicament. Seeing that Amanda was slowly accumulating the mana into her bow, Ren smirked at Elijah, who was smacking him. Oh. You're being slapped senseless and yet you still have the guts to smile? Slap. As soon as the slap landed on Ren's face, his head twisted to the side due to the enormous force of the slap. Slap. Slapping the other side, Ren's face twisted to the other side, doing a complete 180. Since you asked for it, I will gladly pick up the pace. Slap. 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 For the next 5 minutes, the loud sounds of slaps reverberated across the hall. Soon, Elijah stopped as he looked down. Beneath him, Ren's battered face could be seen bleeding all over the floor. His face was so swollen that his eyes were barely visible. Let's end this. Seeing that Ren was no longer responsive, Elijah prepared to go for the kill. Though he was sure that no one was going to interfere for the next 2 hours, he still needed to finish the mission. Toying with the prey should come later. Raising his hand, his nails increased in length, becoming extremely sharp at the tips.
Goodbye.
Whoosh! Just as he was about to pierce Rin in the neck, he heard a whistling sound coming from behind him. Turning his head abruptly, he saw a large silver light quickly heading in his direction. It was so fast that the air around it split apart. Staring at the incoming arrow, Elijah's pupils dilated and he gathered all of the mana he had in the form of a shield. This all happened in a matter of seconds. Boom! Soon, a large explosion reverberated across the hall as dust and debris swept the place. The windows around the hall completely shattered and cracks could vividly be seen around the walls of the hall. As soon as the dust cleared, the tattered figure of Elijah could be seen. His elegant figure from before was no longer seen, as his hair and clothes were a mess. Black veins slowly started appearing on his face as they wiggled constantly. His muscles spasmed continuously and his body enlarged into a hideous-looking creature. Qua! Hastily touching his face, Elijah screamed. His eyes, which were now a deep shade of red, stared at Amanda, who was helplessly lying down on the floor. How dare you! Screaming at the top of his lungs, Elijah moved towards Amanda. He was in a state of pure rage. Completely forgetting about his mission, he headed towards Amanda, preparing to kill her. However, before he could do that, his body stopped moving. No, it refused to move. Shoo-ah! Spurt! Spitting a large amount of blood, Elijah looked below him where a black sword pierced his heart. It all happened so fast that he had no time to react. Turning around, he could see two emotionless eyes staring at him. He whose soul had been battered to the point of being unable to move was looking at him with eyes that seemed to look straight into his soul. YKHOU? H-ow? Checkmate. Thud. Those were the last words Elijah heard before his body slumped on the ground lifeless. Gulp. Taking out a potion, Rin instantly drank it. Soon, at a speed visible to the naked eye, all the bruises on his face disappeared. Stabbing Elijah's corpse a couple of times, Rin slowly walked in Amanda's direction. Right now she was looking at Rin in shock. Though she didn't see clearly, she managed to see the moment when he pierced Elijah in the hearth. Fast, too fast. All she saw was Elijah's eyes staring at the sword stabbed in his body in disbelief. Looking at Rin, who was walking in her direction, Amanda instinctively moved back, but as soon as she tried to lift her body she fell to the ground. She had no more energy left. Soon he was in front of her. His emotionless eyes looked down on her. She looked back, and the hall soon enveloped in silence. Forget what you saw. Those were the last words she heard before she felt a tap on the back of her neck. Soon darkness enveloped her mind as she passed out on the ground. After making sure Amanda was knocked unconscious, Rin took 4 arrows from her quiver and walked back to where Elijah's corpse was. Spurt! 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 Stabbing each arrow in his body, Rin made sure they each stabbed exactly where his sword stabbed Elijah. After making sure there were no traces of what he had done left, Rin walked a bit further away from where Elijah's corpse was, fixed his clothes and hair, and forcefully knocked himself unconscious. Thud. As his eyes slowly lost consciousness and the effects of a monarch's indifference wore off, a small smile appeared on his face. Not bad. Chapter 48, A Not-So-Joyous After-Party, 4. Spurt. Matriarch. Splurting black blood on the ground, inside of a dim light room, an enchanting figure clenched her heart. A black silhouette appeared next to the matriarch, who had just splurted black blood on the ground and hastily helped her sit on her throne. Though her breath was weak, her presence remained majestic as the servant did not dare utter a single word. Gripping the armrest of her throne, the matriarch, whose figure was now incomparably pale, said, "He failed." Crack! Crack! Tightening her grip on the armrest, cracks started appearing on the throne as a red glow started emanating from the matriarch's figure. Fortunately, because he was much weaker than me, his death has only cost me a small internal injury. Hearing what the matriarch had said, the servant worriedly asked, "How long do you need to recuperate?" "I should be healed in about a year's time." Turning her head to the servant that was next to her, she coldly ordered, "Get someone to send me all of the information regarding the incident that Elijah was responsible for." "Yes, Mother Matriarch." Nodding his head, the servant disappeared into the darkness. As soon as he disappeared, the red hue around the matriarch increased many folds, enveloping the whole room. "Once I find out who was responsible for killing my pawn." Boom! The throne behind the matriarch suddenly pulverized as she stood up. With a distorted face and eyes that were dyed red in rage, she slowly spat. "I will personally make sure they suffer a pain worse than death." Amanda's consciousness was awakened by a dazzling light coming through her eyelids, stimulating her pupils. Waking up in a large spacious room, Amanda blankly stared at the familiar ceiling she had been seeing for the past month. Lightly lifting her head, Amanda stared at her room. The room was large, and besides her, there was a massive bookshelf filled to the brim with books. A large desk stood in the right corner of the room. On it, a white desk lamp sat on the right corner of the desk with books neatly piled around it. The room had a nice woody, tranquil feeling around it that could calm anyone who was in it. The sunlight directly entered the room from the large windows around the room, brightening the surroundings. Before entering the academy, because of her outstanding results, she was asked by the academy how she wanted to design the room, and this was the outcome. The tranquility and silence in the room calmed her mind. Ugh! Touching her head, she felt a strong headache whenever she tried remembering what had happened the night prior. It felt as if her head was being split into two. The last thing she remembered was seeing two emotionless eyes staring at her. Recalling the young man that was responsible for killing Elijah, Amanda's head was filled with questions. Although she had never paid much attention to him, she still did observe him from time to time like all of her classmates. In fact, because he tended to do weird things, she more or less had an impression of him. In both elective and class, he looked like someone who was sloppy. He cared for no one around him and always seemed to be bored in class. Especially in the elective, where he would forcefully try to pay attention to the lecture, though it always ended with him making strange faces. However, after the happenings of the party, her previous impression of him had completely shattered. Recalling his two eyes devoid of emotions that perfectly calculated the exact time to strike, Amanda felt a cold chill run down her spine. Even though she was indifferent to most things, she couldn't help but want to find out more about him. In one moment he was a sloppy good-for-nothing weirdo, and in another a calculating cold-blooded killer. What was his true personality? Bam! Snapping Amanda out of her thoughts was the sound of the door opening as two stunning girls accompanied by two extremely handsome boys entered the room. Rushing next to Amanda, Emma worriedly looked at her as she patted her body all over to make sure she was okay. "Amanda, I saw on the news about what had happened, are you okay?" Nodding her head slightly, she looked at the four individuals that had entered her room. Jean, Kevin, Melissa, and Emma. Though she didn't show it on her face, seeing that they had come to visit her, Amanda felt a little warmth in her heart. Interrupting Emma, who was all over Amanda, Kevin spoke. "I was extremely surprised when I received the news of what had happened. How did you manage to defeat a D-rank villain?" Don't tell me you forgot, here, take a look." Seeing the confused look on Amanda's face, Emma took her phone out from her pocket. She then proceeded to turn on the holographic function and swiped towards Amanda. Soon a virtual newspaper article appeared before her. At 10:22 p.m. in Ashton City, D-rank villain who had infiltrated top human academy, Locke, attempted to kill more than 50 students. An anonymous tip had alerted the authorities beforehand about the sudden attack, and upon arrival, the corpse of D-rank villain was found. The corpse of the villain had multiple arrow wounds all over its body. Upon investigation, all drinks and foods present in the venue had been drugged beforehand by a potent drug containing a strong sleeping agent. Currently, the venue owners of Lou Ferret are under arrest on the suspicion of collusion with villains. Fortunately, thanks to the courageous efforts of one individual, this disaster was prevented. If not for the heroic feats of top student Amanda Stern, this day would have turned into a tragic massacre. The motive behind the attack is still unknown. Looking through the article, Amanda slowly and carefully read the article from top to bottom, not skipping a single detail. Was it his doing? She knew for a fact that she wasn't the person responsible for Elijah's death. Yet, from what she was reading in the article, it seemed like she was the one who had killed him. The fact that she was passed out with her bow in her hand, coupled with the multiple arrows that belonged to her which were found on Elijah's body, made everyone assume that she was the one responsible for killing him. Only she knew the truth. She had only shot one arrow that night, and all it did was leave superficial wounds. It didn't injure him at all. The real killer was not her, it was him. Though at that moment her head was dizzy, she remembered the moment when Elijah was killed. It was one swift sword movement so fast that Elijah, a D-rank villain, had no time to react. What was even more impressive was the fact that he had done this, exactly when Elijah's guard was at its lowest. Almost as if he knew this was going to happen. Had he failed, only death would have been his outcome. Cold, precise, cunning, many words came into her mind as she tried to describe him the best way she could. Hey, Amanda. Snapping Amanda out of her thoughts, was Emma's concerned voice. Sorry. Lowering her head, Amanda apologized. She was so lost in her own thoughts that she had ignored everyone that had come into the room. It's fine, you must still be in shock. Shaking her head, Emma patted Amanda on her shoulder as she gestured for the other guys in the room to leave. We'll let you have some rest, call us if you need anything. Winking at Amanda, Emma quickly brought everyone out of the room. Clank. Closing the room's door, silence permeated the room once again, leaving a stunning young girl alone in her thoughts. You think she's okay? Standing outside Amanda's room, Emma looked at the 4 people beside her. Thinking for a bit, Kevin said. Honestly, I can't tell. Her face is always indifferent, so I'm not too sure. True. Nodding her head, Emma couldn't help but agree with Kevin's evaluation. Despite the fact that Amanda had just gone through a traumatic experience, her expression never changed. She remained indifferent. Even for her, who was extremely outgoing, talking to Amanda was difficult. She never knew what she was thinking. Did she even think of them as friends? Seeing everyone's somber expression, Kevin tried lightening up the mood by changing the topic. But hey, I didn't expect her to be strong enough to defeat a D-rank villain by herself.
Yeah.
You're right, who would have thought she was that strong? What do you think, Melissa? Realizing what Kevin was trying to do, Emma redirected the conversation to Melissa. Melissa, who was unamusingly scrolling through some research papers, noticed that Emma was talking to her and unenthusiastically said, I guess it's pretty impressive. Noticing how uninterested Melissa was, Emma pouted and said, Geez, can you at least look a little bit more interested? No chance. Despite having known Amanda and the rest for a month and a half, to call them close would be a lie. Because she spent most of her time in the lab doing research, she barely had enough time to get to know them better. Not that she was interested in knowing them. To Melissa, anything that wasn't related to her research didn't really mean anything to her. Though to outsiders, it looked like they all got along well with each other, the only reason why they talked to each other in the first place was because they were living under the same roof and would make good connections for the future. Since they were all going to be future pillars of humanity, it wasn't a bad idea to make a connection with them. Moreover, for some reason, people always tended to avoid them. Jealousy? Fear? Worship? No one knew why they avoided them, but that only made their social circle smaller. Seeing how uninterested Melissa was, Emma sighed and looked at Jean. Behind Melissa, Jean stood there dumbly. His expression was that of pure indifference. He looked to be deep into his own world, ignoring everyone around him. Well, I'm gonna head back now. Seeing that this conversation was going nowhere, Emma gave up and decided to leave. Following her, Kevin and Melissa left, leaving Jean standing there by himself. A couple of minutes after everyone left, clenching his fist extremely hard, veins appeared on Jin's forehead. Though he tried extremely hard to suppress his rage, Jin's face became incomparably dark. Right now his mind was torn. Not only Kevin was stronger than him, but Amanda too? No matter how many times he tried to visualize it in his mind, killing a ranked villain was impossible for the current him. Though people assumed that he was ranked 3rd because of his status and talent, no one knew how much he worked for his rank. He had come to the lock thinking that he was going to be the highest ranking first year, yet when the results came out he was ranked 3rd. Moreover, the gap between him and the first place, Kevin, was absurdly high. His failure to come first was also emphasized by his family, who had high hopes for him. He was in total shock. He understood Melissa. Her academic achievement was so absurdly high that it managed to propel her to 2nd place. He was fine with that, but Kevin? Someone that no one knew about prior to entering the lock? It was a heavy blow to his immense pride. The pride of having grown up thinking that he was the best among the younger generation. Despite his failure, Jean did not let rage cloud his mind. Though he disliked Kevin, he looked at him more like an obstacle to surpass rather than an enemy. To try and bridge the gap between himself and Kevin, Jean trained 3 times harder than he had done previously, and just when he had thought he managed to bridge the gap between them, Amanda killed a ranked villain. This news came as a shock for him, and even now that a day had passed he still couldn't stop thinking about it. Because Amanda's father was the guild master of the first-ranking guild in the world, Demon Hunter, and his father was the greatest shareholder of the second-ranked guild, Starlight Guild, he had known Amanda since young. Since birth, because of the rivalry between the two guilds, he had been continuously compared to her. He took great pride in the fact that he had gotten a higher rank than her when he enrolled in the lock. His father also took great pride in that, as he praised him endlessly, further feeding his ego. He had managed to suppress the Demon Hunter Guild rising momentum. Yet this sense of accomplishment all seemed to be a lie. The more he stayed here, the more he realized how normal he was. He had been showered with praises since young. He became arrogant, but he managed to back his arrogance. He was the best. Was he? What am I? Staring at the long dark corridor, Jean was lost in his own thoughts. A seed of inferiority slowly started implanting itself inside of his mind. Chapter 49, Aftermath 1. A couple of days had passed since the party, but news of what had transpired during the party spread throughout the whole academy like wildfire. It was to the point that pretty much everyone knew what had happened. Currently, I was laying on my bed staring at the white ceiling of my room. Lost in my own thoughts. I thought that since I didn't directly participate in the main plotline of the story that the future wouldn't change. I thought I had full control of my memories, so I decided to take advantage of them and help myself to some of the benefits whilst also trying to not affect the plotline. But I was wrong. No matter how small the change was, once it began, there was no stopping it. It suddenly hit me. One little change could cause massive changes to the whole story. It was like a domino chain. Regardless of how small the force was, once the first domino fell, like a chain reaction, all the dominoes fell apart. I was naive, no. I was arrogant. Because of my arrogance, the plotline started changing. In a way that I was losing control of the advantage that I had as the author. The event between Elijah and Amanda should have never happened this early in the novel. Somehow my actions had affected the novel. Despite me repeating to myself that everything was going to be fine, I was simply lying to myself. I couldn't deny something that happened right before my eyes. I couldn't deny that my existence itself had changed the plotline. I fundamentally needed to change the way I was thinking. But how? Do I actively interact with the protagonists or keep myself in the shadows as I did before? I was lost. Ring. Snapping me from my thoughts was the sound of my cell phone ringing. Turning it on, I looked at the notification that showed up. Amanda Stern single-handedly defeats rank villain that had infiltrated the academy and posed as Elijah Turner. She had been AWA. It seems like the news was already starting to spread outside of the academy. During these past few days, Amanda managed to cement herself as one of the foremost geniuses in our generation. Ice Queen, Bow Goddess, Villain Killer, all sort of nicknames started circulating around the academy as everyone started paying attention to her. The reason for such attention was because she single-handedly defeated a rank villain despite only being in the early stages of rank. A genius amongst geniuses. After the incident, she was now being compared to the likes of Kevin in terms of raw talent. Turning off my phone, I gave myself a pat on the back. It seems like I managed to cover my traces quite well as nothing was mentioned regarding me. It also seems that Thomas covered for me, preventing anyone from finding out that I was responsible for tipping them about the incident. Looks like I owe him one. Fortunately, apart from the small loophole, with the facts pointing towards Amanda, my daily life returned to what it was before. Well, that was how it was supposed to be like, but... After changing and heading to my classroom, I noticed two eyes deeply staring at me from the left side of the classroom. Awkwardly smiling, I lightly waved in Amanda's direction. I was hoping she would take that hint and leave me alone, but it seemed that my action only further increased the intensity of her stare. Does she perhaps have a grudge against me for putting her in the spotlight? I thought as I tried my best to look at the front, ignoring her piercing stare. It was plausible. Because of my action, the whole world was now paying attention to her. If something like this happened to me, I too would have held a grudge against myself. Sometimes fame was more of a curse than a blessing. Or did she perhaps misunderstand something regarding my strength? Now that I thought about it, she probably thought that I was someone who was hiding his strength. She was not wrong about that, but looking back at the event, she probably has a misconception about the true extent of my abilities. Though I did in fact kill a rank villain, many factors had come to play in me defeating him. If she had not distracted him with her last-ditch attack, and if Elijah didn't underestimate me, added with me having monarchs in Diffris, I would have never been able to kill Elijah. Me killing Elijah was something that many factors combined together helped me achieve. It wasn't something I could ever hope to achieve again. But there were no what-ifs in this world, and thus I was now stuck with Amanda thinking I was some sort of genius that was comparable to the likes of Kevin. This was honestly problematic. As I was lamenting at how Amanda probably misunderstood me, Melissa, who was sitting 3 rows behind Amanda, noticed her weird behavior and looked in the direction she was looking at. Soon her eyes paused on me. Raising her brow, Melissa rubbed her eyes a couple of times before making sure that Amanda was indeed looking at me. At first, she clicked her tongue, then suddenly a smirk appeared on her face. I instantly felt an ominous premonition. Just now, she did her signature smile. The smile signaled that she was onto something. Can I start crying already? This was why I didn't want to interact with her. Not only was she a sadistic girl who took pleasure in others' suffering, but she was the type to repay grudges many times fold. On the bright side, no one noticed the interaction that had just occurred. Emma and Kevin were currently busy talking with Miss Donna, and Jean was at the front of the classroom unusually quiet. If the fact that the class loner suddenly interacted with the two most beautiful girls in the academy was to spread, I could already start planning my funeral. The sheer amount of admirers those two have could probably fill 25 football fields. It was that ridiculous. Okay, class is starting, please be seated everyone. Looking at the clock and seeing that it was time for class to start, Donna dismissed everyone that was in the front of the class and headed for the podium. Quiet please. Gesturing for the class to quiet down, Donna lightly raised her palm. Soon everyone stopped talking. Seeing how everyone shut up as soon as Donna spoke, I couldn't help but admire her even more. The degree of control she had over the class was quite impressive. With just a few words and gestures she managed to shut the whole class up. It may have something to do with the art she practices, but her natural charisma was not to be dismissed either. She just had this charm around her that made any man or woman follow whatever she said. Today we will select the groups you will be split into during our trip to Hallberg. Oh crap, forgot this was happening. Was too caught up with the Amanda thing that I had completely forgotten we had a class trip in about a week's time. I honestly didn't want to go. Please come to the front of the class and collect your ticket. Not caring about my predicament, Donna took a large box and put it in front of the podium. I'll call your name one by one in ascending order. Taking her register, Donna continued. You are to take one ticket and that will be your group for the week that you will be in Hallberg. Now let's start. Rank 1, Kevin Voss. Hearing his name being called, Kevin stood up and headed to where Donna was. Here? Yes, take a ticket and go back to your seat. Listening to Donna, Kevin reached his hand into the box and took a ticket. Instantly everyone's attention was drawn towards him. They were all curious about his group number. Being the number one ranked in the whole year, if anyone was paired up with him they were guaranteed results. This was shown multiple times in things such as in the virtual class and other group activities as he got the first rank in every one of those activities. Seeing everyone's reaction, I scoffed at them. Do you think that by freeloading on Kevin you will get a good grade? Hate to break it to you, but this time you'll come back disappointed as an incident will prevent him from completing whatever he was supposed to do in Hallberg. Looking at his number, Kevin remained silent for a second before going back to his seat. To everyone's disappointment, he didn't show what group number he got. Well, that rule didn't apply to me who knew exactly what he got. His group was Group 7, and if I'm not wrong Melissa would end up being in the same group as him. Next, Melissa Hall. Standing up, Melissa walked to the podium and took a ticket. Briefly glancing at the ticket, Melissa walked back to her seat. The stares were just as intense as when Kevin had come up. This time it wasn't because of her ability, but more because of how beautiful she was. Next, Jean Horton. Next, Ren Dover. Finally. After who knows how long, my turn had finally come. Since everyone had gotten their ticket, most people ignored me. No one really cared about me, so I didn't feel any eyes on me. Is what I wanted to say, but I found two sets of eyes focusing on me. Trying my best to ignore them, my mouth and brows twitched a couple of times. Without even glancing at me, Donna coldly said, "Take your ticket and leave." Trying to hide my bitterness at Donna's overly harsh tone, I reached out into the box and took a ticket. As soon as my hand was inside of the box, I secretly channeled some of my mana into it. Though Melissa tried to hide it well, the small spell she cast inside of the box didn't escape my eyes. Taking out a ticket, I headed back to my seat. As I was walking up, I noticed Melissa's face crumbling. It looked as if she had eaten crap. It felt great. Secretly winking at her, I sat back in my seat and proceeded to ignore her. He, you think I wouldn't know what you were up to? Please, I am your creator. Do you think I wouldn't know about your petty tricks? As soon as I saw her smirk, I knew she was up to something. Thinking back to my novel, I pretty much deduced what she was trying to do and broke the spell she placed inside of the box. She was probably trying to manipulate the tickets so that I would end up in a crappy group. Most probably, she was trying to group me with Amanda. Since she noticed how odd Amanda was behaving, she must have thought she had a grudge against me or something, which wasn't wrong. Too bad for her. I already knew what she was trying to do and stopped whatever spell she placed inside of the box. Clap. Clapping once to gather everyone's attention, Donna said. All right, now that everyone has found a group, you may leave the class. Just as everyone was about to stand up to leave the class, Donna smacked her palm with her fist.
Ah.
One more thing. Taking a ticket out of the box, she flipped the ticket backward and said, Behind the ticket, you will find that there is a room number and a list of things you will need to bring and do during your trip. Please go to the room after you leave the class and discuss with your groups which task you will do. Listening to her and flipping over my ticket, I looked through the contents. Equals 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 equals. Group 9. Group Room A, B, 15. Task. In-depth report on how monster parts are processed in a factory. The report must detail how monsters are skinned, processed, and turned into raw materials to be used in artifact creation. In-depth report on the different properties of monster parts. From density to breaking point, elasticity, etc. Interview with the vice director of the factory and report their economic strategy and what sets them apart from other monster processing plants. Equals 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 equals. This was part of the reason why I didn't want to go. The sheer amount of boring tasks we needed to do made me depressed. It just wasn't something I was looking forward to. All right, class dismissed. Finished with what she wanted to say, Donna packed her stuff and left the classroom. Sighing, I stood up and went to the room I was supposed to go to meet my group. I hope I get a decent group. Though it was only a pipe dream, a man could still hope, right? Chapter 50, Aftermath, 2. Inside a small classroom that was about the size of a bedroom, two individuals sat facing each other. Of the two individuals, one was a female while the other was a male. The male had his head held down and was fearfully looking at the female, who was looking at him with her legs and arms crossed. Her face was incomparably dark. It looked as if they were in a murder trial, with the male student being the one under trial. Breaking the silence was the female, whose voice sounded extremely dark. Ren. Dover. It's been a while, Melissa. Yes, the boy who was currently being persecuted was in fact me. Sitting down in front of Melissa, I tried my best to avoid her eyes. Right now her face was smiling, but her eyes weren't. I had a feeling that she wanted nothing more but to eat me alive. Why was she in a bad mood? Looking at my number and Melissa's number, a few tears streamed down my cheeks. Group 9. My plan backfired badly. Would you believe me if I told you it was an accident? Accident? Pray do tell me, what might you be referring to? I do recall seeing an insect winking at me during our class, or did I see wrong? Please someone save me. Nervously looking around the room, my eyes paused on a black concoction in the middle of the table. Out of desperation, I tried to change the topic. This is? Expecting my question, Melissa dazzlingly smiled and said, New potion I've been experimenting with. Just for you, free of charge. Squinting my eyes, I moved my chair back and warily asked, "What does it do?" Covering her mouth with her hand, Melissa lightly laughed and said, "Nothing much apart from making you throw up dozens of times over and making you feel like you had just been through hell. What makes this potion even more special is that if you are lucky enough there's a chance you can throw up your own intestine, killing you instantly." Can I pass? It honestly scared me how she managed to say all of this with a straight face. Bam! Just as I was despairing at my situation, opening the door, 3 young prideful individuals entered the room. Looking around the room, they soon noticed Melissa, who was sitting in front of me. Instantly their arrogance deflated a notch. "Hello there, Melissa Hall." Walking in front of Melissa, what seemed to be the leader of the trio elegantly bowed in front of her. His facial features, which were devoid of any imperfections, accompanied by his sharp eyes and brows, made him look suave and elegant. He had short black hair and green eyes that resembled finely polished jades. Though he was not extremely handsome, his looks were enough to make any girl swoon. "It is an honor to meet Melissa Hall, one of the most beautiful women in our academy and pioneer in the scientific field." Pausing and fixing his uniform, he said, "My name is Donald Burson." Who? Another extra who thought they were the shit. Honestly, if the guy could read Melissa's mind at the moment, he would have probably have made a run for it. Smiling, Melissa glanced at the young individual before her and said, "You must be rank 167 Donald Burson, whose father is an A-rank hero of the Starlight Guild." As soon as Melissa finished speaking, Donald straightened his back with pride. Looking at me, he smirked. What did I do? Do I even know you? Is he that proud that Melissa knew who he was? Ignoring Doolin's subtle action against me, Melissa smiled and politely said, "How can I help you?" To me it just looked like she was saying, "Be quick and fuck off. I don't have time to deal with you scrubs," but maybe I was just too biased. Let me introduce the rest of the people before I continue. Stepping to the side, Donald presented one of the other group members. "This is rank 298, Evan Smoke." Standing behind Donald, a rather chubby individual with ginger hair and freckles all over his face appeared. With his hands behind his back, Evan haughtily looked around the room. His demeanor reminded me of one of those villainous nobles you would find in novels. Smiling amiably, Evan lightly bowed in front of Melissa. "Nice to meet you, Melissa Hall. I have heard of your outstanding achievements since I was very young. I had been eagerly awaiting the day where we would meet, and upon seeing you I can say with confidence that there is no other woman out there that can confidently claim to be more beautiful than you." Talk about excessive flattery. Unlike Donald, I actually knew who he was. He was no one important per se, he was another extra. But this time, I actually knew him 'cause I actually remembered writing about him. He appeared on the trip and arrogantly confronted Kevin, only to be instantly shut down. True extra. After Evan finished his introductions, Donald turned to the remaining student. "And this is rank 475, Cassandra Lee." Standing next to Evan, a rather skinny young female with a buzz cut presented herself. With her hands in her blazer pockets and whilst chewing gum, she looked at Melissa with interest. She had 2 piercings on her right lip and nose, and her lips, which were black, accompanied by her eyes which were filled with eyeshadow, reminded me of someone who was in their emo phase. She had black metal bracelets on her arm and her uniform was unkempt. Smiling lightly, she looked at Melissa and said, "Pleasure to meet you." Greeting everyone, Melissa turned her attention back to Donald. "Nice to meet you, so what do you want?" "Nothing much, we are in the same group, so I wanted to introduce myself and my companions to you, who is going to be part of our team. Since we still have about a week before going on the trip, I thought it would be a great idea to form a good bond while we are at it." Laughing lightly, Donald, Evan, and Cassandra eagerly looked at Melissa. Sigh. How more obvious can you be? If you wanted to hang out with Melissa, you could have just said so from the beginning. Why go through all of this nonsense? Noticing my reaction, Donald stopped laughing and gloomily said, "What's so funny?" Rolling my eyes at his immature display, I said, "There's a week left before the trip and you're planning on making friends rather than just allocating our tasks." Annoyed by my rebuttal, Donald finally acknowledged my presence as he asked, "Who are you?" "Rank 1750 Rindover." Instantly the whole room was filled with laughter and ridicule. "Rank 1750 and you dare talk to me like that? Ho ho ho, to think that someone who is ranked so low exists. I bet in terms of spouting crap his rank is around the top 3 in the whole year, no, the academy." Rolling my eyes at them, I said, "To think there was not only one delusional person here, but 3? How disappointing." Instantly the room became quiet. Donald and the other two's faces instantly crumbled. After a brief pause, and processing what I had just said, Donald shouted, "What?" Summoning his spear from his dimensional space, Donald grabbed it and pointed its sharp tip at me. A blue glow appeared around his body. "Shut that flimsy mouth of yours before I cut your tongue off with my superior skills and talent that a nobody like you can ever hope to have." Seeing him taking out his spear, summoning my sword from my bracelet, I grabbed it and a white glow started appearing around my body as I spat back, "No, you shut your mouth. How more obvious can you be that you're a third-rate villain with your third-rate quotes?" Hatefully glaring at me and gritting his teeth, Donald pretended to hit me with his spear, but I didn't even flinch.
Grr.
Seeing that his feint was seen through, Donald clenched his teeth even harder. Seeing his reaction, I triumphantly smirked at him and raised my middle finger. "Wanna bet that I don't even need to lift my finger before I can decapitate that useless head of yours?"
You
Bastard. Finally snapping after hearing my comment, Donald prepared to stab me for real. But before he could do that, he heard an annoyed sigh coming from behind him. Sigh. Is it fun to waste time like this? Sitting on the table, Melissa covered her face with her hands. Melissa? Stopping, Donald and the rest looked at Melissa, who seemed to be in an extremely bad mood. Why are you all acting like children? But he started it? Snapping at him, Melissa looked at Donald in utter disgust. What? Are you some kind of child? He started this, he started that? Do you know how many fucks I give about that? Raising her hand, she did an "oh" sign with her fingers and said, "Absolutely zero." Being berated by Melissa, the rest lowered their heads in shame. If it was anyone else they would have probably fought back, but since it was Melissa they could only suck it up. Every time someone tried to talk they would immediately be glared at by Melissa, shutting them up instantly. Clicking her tongue, Melissa continued, "Stop flapping those useless mouths of yours and do the work. We were asked to talk about our work. I had come with the expectations that the people in my group would be regular humans, but it seems like I was paired up with a bunch of useless chickens and buffoons that can only dance around wildly yapping their mouths nonstop. Frankly, shut up. Your mere existence is annoying me. BB." Raising her hand to stop them from talking, Melissa glared at them and said, "Don't wanna hear it. If you want to do me a favor, just stop breathing. You'll be plenty useful then." He. Seeing the trio's deflated looks I couldn't help but laugh lightly. Karma got them good. And you, why are you smiling? Yes, you are the most useless of the lot and yet you dare enjoy this like it's some sort of show? Booty. Shut up, and follow their example and stop breathing. Shutting up, I dared not to utter a single word. I was pretty sure she realized I was making fun of them from the beginning and thus why she was glaring at me the hardest. Turning my head right, the first thing that caught my sight was the trio smirking in my direction, seemingly enjoying my predicament. Squinting my eyes at them, I made a mental note to myself. It seems like 3 more names will be added to my long list of people who I should beat up. Just you wait. I will definitely turn those smiles upside down. Sigh, all right, let's get this over with. Seeing that everyone had started to become more obedient, Melissa sat back on her seat, crossed her legs, and looked through the tasks which we were supposed to do. It had to be noted that she was the only one sitting as the rest of us were still standing with our backs straight, not daring to utter a single word. You will be responsible for the first task. Pointing at Cassandra and Evan, Melissa apathetically spoke as she allocated their task, not caring for their opinion. You will be responsible for the second task, whilst I will do the third task alone. Looking to my left, my eyes met Donald's. Our eyes both screamed, hell no, but we just pretended to smile at each other in a friendly manner. The groups were Cassandra and Evan for task 1, me and Donald for task 2, and Melissa for task 3. I wanted to rebuke so badly, but I didn't dare to. I'm sure Donald shared the same sentiment as me, but we were both too scared of Melissa to dare speak out our thoughts. All right, I've wasted enough time babysitting the lot of you. I am heading back now, I have better things to do. Throwing the group ticket away, Melissa stood up and left the room. Right after her, everyone else left the room, me included. Staring at the now darkening sky, I let out an exhausted sigh. This was going to be a long trip. Chapter 51, Eve before the trip, 1. Prior to the first cataclysm, science dictated the natural laws of the world. Phenomenons such as the creation of the universe, the extinction of dinosaurs, the life cycle of planets, everything was explained through the usage of science. Yet, as soon as manna came into the world, things that science dictated to be impossible became possible. Summoning fireballs, splitting mountains, turning invisible, running at speeds that the naked eye couldn't see. Despite how much scientists tried to rack their brains around it, they couldn't explain such phenomenons. The world's standards changed. What we previously thought we knew had to be reviewed. That was because of the existence of a new index. Manna. In 2015, Dmitry Morlov, a scientist of Russian descent, proposed a new scientific branch called magic. Magic used to be a word to describe petty tricks that fooled the human eyes, yet now Dmitry Morlov proposed for it to become a new scientific branch that stood with the likes of physics, chemistry, and biology. At first, all major political authorities disagreed. How could they suddenly change the system that they had been using for centuries? They thought that as time passed they would be able to incorporate the existence of manna into the current scientific standards. But as time passed and people learned more about manna, their ideology changed, and finally in 2032 magic was approved as a new scientific branch. Magical research. This was the name of the class I was currently headed to. It was also the class that Assistant Professor Gilbert von Dexteroy taught. The secret head of the blood supremacist group that dominated the academy alongside the 2 other major groups, Noblesse and Empire's Sword. Despite there being many factions inside of the academy, blood supremacist, Noblesse, and Empire's Sword were the ones that had the most influence and members. The Noblesse faction had a similar concept to blood supremacist in the fact that they only accepted people with certain statuses. However, in contrast to them, they weren't as radical. They didn't despise people just because of their lineage and wealth. Most of the members in Noblesse didn't even get to choose to join the faction as it was decided beforehand by their parents. Emma and Melissa too were forced to join because of their parents' influence. If everything went according to the plotline, during the last month of their second year, they would both be elected as the heads of the faction. Lastly, there was Empire's Sword. Unlike the other major faction, Empire's Sword didn't select members based on their lineage or status. It only focused on individual strength. In order to enter, you must prove that you were worthy of holding their name. As such, the requirement to joining the faction was to defeat a senior member. Only upon proving your strength could you enter the faction. Ranks within the faction were also determined by strength, with the head of the faction being the current rank 1 of the 3rd year. Those were the 3 major factions, and fortunately for me, I managed to avoid getting on their radar, allowing me to have a fairly carefree life. Despite the fact that being in a faction had many perks, it also came with many disadvantages. Most notably the fact that you had less time for yourself. Because I was quite behind the rest of the protagonists when I had reincarnated in this world, I needed all the time I could spare to train myself so that I could catch up to them. Because of how talented they were, catching up to them was not going to be an easy task. A month and a half had passed since reincarnating in this world and I wasn't even close to surpassing Emma, whose rank was currently, let alone Kevin, the main protagonist, whose rank was borderline. Simply put, I did not have time to waste on hidden politics. Fortunately, as if God had heeded my prayer, now that Elijah was found to be a villain, my elective was suspended indefinitely, granting me more time to train. With the potions that Melissa has made for me, my training speed has seen a massive boost. If things kept going at this speed, it wouldn't take too long for me to reach the rank. Whistling happily, I headed to my class in a good mood. However, my good mood only lasted for a split second, because as soon as I stepped outside of my dorm I caught sight of something that I didn't want to see. Not so far from where I was standing, I could see 1st and 2nd years glaring at each other. Some were even close to resorting to physical violence. If not for their friends holding them back, a fight would have already broken out. The conflicts within the academy were slowly getting out of control. It had gotten to the point that even innocent bystanders were starting to get swept into the conflict. I could no longer walk without worrying about my safety. With the backing of his father, Fabian managed to hide his involvement regarding the conflicts, preventing the professors from finding out what was truly happening. Fabian's goal with these conflicts was simple: create as much chaos as possible. Make the professors focus on the conflicts within the academy rather than Emma. It was all proceeding as he planned. The only upside about this situation was that everything was proceeding as I predicted. There were no changes to this scenario, allowing me to take a load off my back. As long as the plotline didn't change, I could still exploit the fact that I knew the future. As long as the plotline more or less remained the same, I could have some peace of mind. I arrived in my class and sat in my usual seat and waited for Assistant Professor Gilbert to start the lecture. Since he wasn't a professor yet, he could only be referred to as Assistant Professor. The class was unusually chatty today, with some male and female students excited about the upcoming class. The primary reason for their excitement was because of the person who was teaching them today. Eagerly looking at the front of the class, everyone's eyes paused on a young individual with dirt blonde hair. He had a noble air around him that made him look like an aristocrat from ancient times, and his features that were relatively handsome made some of the girls in class blush. Gilbert von Dexteroy. Not only was he extremely talented and managed to become an assistant professor at the tender age of 22, but he was also the son of the 3rd-ranked hero, Thunder God Maximus von Dexteroy, one of the 7 heads of the Union. Standing in front of the podium, Gilbert sorted some of the papers in his hands. He looked very serious, and though some students wanted to approach him, he quickly shooed them away. At 5 on the dot, he looked up and began speaking. Welcome to Magical Research. Our course will primarily be focused on mana and what it consists of. We will also look at how the mana from the atmosphere circulates around our body as we speak. What enables us to wield supernatural powers and how it has affected us in our daily lives. As he started speaking, everyone in the class started paying close attention to his words. It wasn't because of his influence, but rather because of how important this class was. For future heroes, this class was extremely important. Not only did it teach the basics of how mana worked, but it also helped students better understand their powers. Mana is nothing but a bundle of elements: fire, water, earth, wind, light, darkness, and so on. Mana is essentially a package that contained all of the elements, and those said elements are what we now refer to as psions. Looking around the class to make sure everyone understood, Gilbert continued. It's fairly simple. When we use mana, all we are doing is actually using the psions within the package, mana, to fit our needs. Take summoning a fireball as an example. Extending his hand forward, a wave of heat spread across the classroom as a large fireball that resembled a sun appeared on Gilbert's palm. To do this, all I did was channel the mana inside of my body and visualized a fireball. But how does simply channeling mana create a fireball? Looking at the large fireball in Gilbert's hand, every student eagerly awaited his next words. They too were curious. Since young, most of the students were taught how to channel mana without actually knowing the reason behind their actions. It was like learning how to breathe but not actually knowing why they were breathing. Everyone wanted to know. Smiling at everyone's enthusiasm, Gilbert continued. In reality, what you are doing is merely stimulating the fire psion within the bundle of mana so that you can materialize fire like I just did. Mana follows the wave-particle theory, meaning that it behaves similarly to both particles and waves. When we use mana. As he was continuing his demonstration, just like the others, I couldn't help but be entranced by his explanations. Though he was an absolute scum of a person, I had to say, he was a really good teacher. His voice was crisp and pleasant, and he didn't leave any detail out when explaining the class contents. Even for someone like me who had only been in this world for a month and a half, the lecture was easy to understand. Although I was not a mage, this lecture was still very useful for me. Though it may not seem like it, I used mana when I practiced the keiki style. Just like the professor had explained, mana was just a bundle of psions that represented different elements, and for my swordsmanship, the main psion that I used was the wind psion. I was able to achieve such a high degree of speed because the keiki style used wind psions to synergize with my sword movement, enabling it to achieve speeds that the naked eye couldn't see. Grandmaster Keiki had stipulated that at the pinnacle of the keiki style, the wind psion was no longer the main psion that was used, but it was in fact the light psion. He believed that only upon the usage of light psions did someone reach the realm of perfection of the keiki style. I was still a far cry from that level, but at least I got a better idea of what to do when training. As Gilbert was continuing his lecture, out of nowhere someone raised their hand up. Yes? Pausing and looking up, Gilbert's eyes wandered towards the student who had just raised his hand. Seeing that he had gotten the professor's attention, standing up, an extremely handsome individual with red eyes and black hair spoke. Professor, if what you said is true, then why can't we separate the psions individually so that we can use spells more efficiently? Instantly the class became silent. Soon Kevin found everyone staring at him. Some were frowning, some were laughing, and some were ridiculing him. Even Gilbert couldn't help but let out a small chuckle. Now, calm down everyone. It is only normal that he doesn't know this, considering that he had only just entered the academy. Without hiding his disdain, Gilbert continued. Though I am surprised you don't know this, Kevin, let me explain it for you. The reason why psions are bundled together and are not separate is because of the law of conservation of energy. A single psion by itself would simply disintegrate in the air because it is unstable. Only when it is with the other psions can it remain stable. As Gilbert was lecturing Kevin, I had already stopped focusing. I was deep into my own thoughts. For the past 2 weeks, I had been stuck in the threshold of the minor reel of mastery of the keiki style. No matter how much I trained, I couldn't quite make that leap to the next level in my sword training. But after hearing Gilbert's lecture, It finally dawned on me. The key to why I couldn't break through to the next realm of sword mastery. Scions. Chapter 52, Eve Before the Trip, 2. Foo. Inside of a dimly lit bedroom, a young boy let out a long breath as he sat crossed-legged. A white glow pulsated around his body, increasing and decreasing constantly. Focusing my mind, I tried to feel the mana around me. After having listened to Gilbert's lecture, I managed to grasp the missing key to my roadblock. Mana control. I needed to have better control of my mana. More precisely, I needed to have better control of wind scions. Since the Keiki style required me to harness wind scions in a way that it coated around my sword so that it could propel it forward, I needed to have a better understanding and control of them. By having better control of wind scions, not only would I become more efficient, but I would also be able to increase the speed of my sword movement. Evening my breathing, I focused entirely on my surroundings. I slowly felt the mana circulating around me. The more I focused, the more I felt like I was underneath the sea, surrounded by water. It felt boundless. Foo. Sucking in my breath, I channeled the mana around me into my body. Slowly the white glow around me increased, extending out from my body. Closing my eyes, I focused on grasping the concepts of wind. What was wind? Wind referred to the movement of gases from high pressure to low pressure areas. High pressure. Low pressure. Slowly the white glow around me brightened. Shum. After a couple of minutes, abruptly opening my eyes, I reached for the sword that sat next to me. Standing up, I positioned myself into my sword stance and focused entirely on what was ahead of me. The world around me disappeared and all that was left was an empty white world with me in the middle. The second movement of the Keiki style, horizon-splitting slash. Shua. Like a lightning bolt, a bright white light enveloped the room. It left as fast as it came. Instantaneous. Opening my eyes, a satisfied smile appeared on my face, though it didn't last long as a long horizontal scar appeared on the wall. Crap. Hurrying over to the wall that I had just slashed with my sword, I traced my finger along the long horizontal scar that I left on the wall. Feeling how deep it was, I couldn't help but curse out loud. There went a couple of thousand you. Damn it. Originally, I was supposed to go to the training grounds to practice, but because I needed to hide the fact that I practice a 5-star module, I was left with the only option of practicing in my room. The commotion of my breakthrough would have just been too big. Moreover, with all the cameras installed, hiding what I was doing was impossible. In the end, I could only lament the fact that I didn't have my own personal training ground. Shaking my head, I slumped back on the ground as fine droplets of sweat dripped from my forehead. Laughing bitterly, I looked at my status. Status. Name, Rendover. Rank, F. Strength, F. Agility, F. Stamina, F. Intelligence, F. Mana capacity, F. Luck, E. Charm, G. Profession. Swordsmanship LVL.2. The degree of understanding of the sword has evolved to the next level. User will find it easier to understand concepts that were previously harder to understand. Martial Manual. Keiki Style, Minor Realm of Mastery. Sword Art created by Grandmaster Toshimoto Keiki. A 5-star module that focused primarily on reaching the apex of swordsmanship and speed. Upon mastery, the sword art becomes so fast that before an opponent could even think about their next move, their heads would already be rolling on the ground. Skills. G. A Monarch's Indifference. A skill that enables users to erase all emotions and act as a supreme monarch that only calculates the best option regardless of circumstance. equals 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 equals. Looking at my stats, my brows involuntarily twitched due to one of the attributes' refusal to increase. On the bright side, I had finally managed to reach rank. I had originally thought that I still needed a couple of weeks to a month before getting promoted to rank, but it seems like my breakthrough had also helped me increase my stats. Another factor that contributed to my sudden rise in rank was probably Melissa's potions. Since they were made by her, the quality was probably on the higher end of the spectrum compared to what was sold on the market. This probably contributed to my sudden increase in rank. I could now proudly say that I was at least within the top 150 if not top 100 in our year. Though I was still not in the top ranks, I was slowly catching up to the others. It didn't matter how long it took, all I needed to know was that I was slowly achieving it. One day, I would slowly but surely become strong enough to overcome any challenges I faced. I didn't want to be helpless again like the time I was in the dungeon. Looking back at my status window, I couldn't help but notice that my swordsmanship had leveled up to 2. As my understanding of the sword increased, so did my profession. The higher the profession level, the higher the understanding you had of the profession. Moreover, the more your profession level increased, the easier it was to understand previously daunting problems. It was like my comprehension had been increased. With my newfound knowledge, I was instantly able to find the flaws of my current fighting style. Despite how good the Keiki style was, I was currently too weak to wield it. Looking back at my previous fights, I remembered always finding myself in a pickle after not being able to finish my opponent on my first hit. I only knew how to attack but not defend. Once I attacked, I wasted too much time trying to regain my stance. Because I was still a newbie with the Keiki style, I wasted too much time transitioning from one stance to the other. This in turn allowed the enemy to regain their bearing, completely removing the element of surprise. Moreover, from my experience, I found that in between the time that I was switching stance I was basically helpless. I needed something that created synergy with the Keiki style. Something that bought me time so that I could regain my stance. My first thought was obviously getting another skill, but considering how expensive and rare they were I could only discard such thought. My next thought was whether I should buy an artifact. If I bought an artifact that created a shield around me after every attack, it could easily solve my problem, but in the end, similarly to skills, I couldn't afford it. Despite the fact that I had 6 million U with me, it was not nearly enough to purchase an artifact that met my precise requirement. In the end, I was left with one option. Learn another sword art. This was probably the easiest method and most appropriate method. There was more than one reason as to why this was the most appropriate choice, but the biggest of them all was that I was in urgent need of a sword art that I could use in the absence of the Keiki style. For obvious reasons, if news were to spread that I was in possession of a 5-star manual, I could kiss my daily life
Goodbye.
as I would be hounded by greedy bastards left and right. It was fine if they were just targeting me, but since I had parents, my every action had to also consider them in the picture. I was no longer alone. Thinking thus far, I knew that I had to mask my real sword art, and what better way to hide that fact than by practicing another one. This way, I could hide my strength from everyone's sight even better. The fewer the loopholes, the better. Plus, if I chose a defense-orientated sword art and if I could use it alongside the Keiki style, my strength would see another boost. It was simply a win-win. Now all I had to do was find the appropriate sword art. A couple of ones came into my head, but they were either too hard to get or were too expensive. The academy also provided them, but you had to have a certain amount of merits in order to use them. I currently had 0. After a long time of me trying to rack my brain over this issue, I decided to leave it for later. It'll eventually hit me. There was no point in trying to think of the solution to a problem in my current circumstances. I was already exhausted from breaking through. There was no point in thinking when my brain capacity was currently at its limit. It'll eventually hit me. Laying down on my bed, I picked up the mysterious red book that I had gotten from the package my mom had sent me. Things have been quiet on Kevin's side. Nothing particularly exciting happened apart from the slight conflict he had with Gilbert at the end of the lesson. I was too immersed in my own enlightenment to witness the conflict. But what essentially happened was that Kevin and Gilbert had a verbal dispute with each other at the end of the lecture. It was a tit for tat. It didn't escalate to a full-blown fight, but it certainly increased the enmity between the two. Especially Gilbert, who already hated Kevin with a passion. Looking through the book and seeing that there was nothing particularly exciting, I closed the book in my hands and prepared to sleep. Regarding the book, one more thing I found out about it was that it couldn't be stored inside of a dimensional space. This was a bummer because it meant that I would essentially have to carry it with me everywhere from now on. Though I didn't use the book much, if the situation called for it, I was always ready to make use of its future alternating properties. But as of now I only used the book to see how Kevin and the story were progressing. There just wasn't a need for me to use it as of now. I mean, although there were some hiccups here and there, the plotline was proceeding as it should be, and because Kevin still didn't have any major conflicts I didn't really feel the need to use it. Ding! Dong! Just as I was about to close my eyes and sleep, the sound of my doorbell ringing could be heard. Who could it be? Sitting up on my bed, I looked in the direction of the door in confusion. I don't recall ordering anything. Frowning, I tried to remember if I had a prior engagement, but I soon shook my head. I wasn't expecting any packages nor expecting someone. Maybe my parents ordered something for me? But I don't recall them ever mentioning anything about this. A myriad of questions entered my mind as I headed for the door. In the end, because I was too tired, I thought nothing of it and opened the door. I wasn't popular enough to have someone actively looking for me. How can I help? Halfway through my sentence, I froze. Standing in front of me stood a stunningly beautiful young girl with glossy black hair that gently fell down all the way to her waist. Her black crystal clear eyes looked directly at me, and though she wasn't as tall as me, we could see each other at eye level. After a moment of pause, she said, "May I come in?" No words came from my mouth. I was so shocked at the moment that I just stood there dumbly. I was totally caught off guard. Tilting her head to the side, and seeing the state I was in, the young girl, without waiting for me to respond, entered my room. It was evident that such a situation was within her expectations. Clank! Snapping me out of my daze was the sound of the door closing as the young girl entered my room. Turning around, a complicated look appeared on my face. Why would Amanda suddenly show up in my room?